over the long term to recognize where misjudgments, where poor choices have become the order of the day rather than just sort of one thing here or there. I think it would be a mistake to respond and think that today's mistake cannot be corrected tomorrow, that it is part of a big problem without recognizing things change and there are larger pictures out there.
Okay, before I let you follow up, I'm going to go to this gentleman here because we only have 5 minutes remaining.
Oh gosh.
Go ahead.
I think that students really underestimate their ability to have an impact on teaching. And I think it's very simple, I think, that if a teacher is not performing, then a large share of the students in that class should be able to observe that. And a large share of the students should be able to testify to that. And I think if those students put their ducks in a row, and they go to the department head and they say, we have these complaints about this teacher, and here is our evidence proposal. The department head doesn't respond, then you go to the dean doesn't respond, you go to the provost doesn't respond, you go right up the line. And I think there's absolutely no reason that students can have a lot more impact on poor teaching than they have. It's just, I don't think they organize, they don't use the system, they tend to respond selectively.
Okay.
Really have 2 questions here. First is to Dr. Mitchell. If you believe that the teaching model is outdated, then where would you fall on the argument about doing away with tenure, the tenure process? And to the panel as a whole, in an ideal student-faculty relationship, what should be the role of the center administration?
I've always thought that tenure can be very dangerous. It's dangerous at the public school level. It's also dangerous at the higher ed level because what it can do if we're not careful, it can breed complacency. I don't have to struggle as hard because I've arrived. And I'm not suggesting that all people operate that way. But there is almost unanimous agreement among folks, an unwritten agreement that once it got tenure, you can't get rid of it. That's a philosophy supported in the public schools. Oh, now they got tenure, there's nothing you can do about it. There is something you can do. It's hard work, and it's exhausting, and it can become very mean. It seems to me if we would use a continuous improvement kind of a process that goes on and on, that would encourage all of us to stay on our toes and to constantly become abreast of the most recent research, the most recent strategies for teaching and making learning exciting, and we don't relax as easily in such a setting.
Okay. Go ahead and follow up on your question.
Okay. I agree with both statements that were said, but that's why I tried to stress that this is not a one incident thing. This has been a continual event in that, it's not just one mistake, it's continuous mistakes. And it has been shown through the years that the attitude has not changed and it's not likely to change with a slight reprimand. So that's why I'm asking, in light of that, the teacher should be removed. In terms of the student responses, there's such a thing as the teacher evaluation that the students have, and if the students do that, then shouldn't that also be looked at? Because the student evaluations, rather than going through the process of filing a grievance or whatever that the university policy is, just the student evaluation of the teacher in the class, and that sometimes that says a lot.
And in fact, student evaluations are taken into account very heavily in staffing decisions. As a matter of fact, many faculty believe that they are taken into account too heavily in the sense that they are very often the only thing that's taken into account in some departments, where there really should be many things taken. But the student evaluations at the end of a course are very often a very important factor in promotion, tenure, salary decisions, all sorts of other things.
We'll go to this gentleman right back there.
I just wanted to make the observation that you're talking about teaching as what the university does, but I think it's a disservice to not mention, especially given the balance of the university, that the university also does research, and that is an aspect that to tenure is very significant, because in a sense, the administration always has pressures on it, and without tenure, you have to look at specific cases, but the feeling I think of part of the faculty is that a disruptive faculty member, especially a junior disruptive faculty member, you can always find a reason to sort of ease that person out if there are public pressures against that person. So the balance between tenure and administration and research, that's all a very sort of subtle process. And I don't think we should overlook that aspect of that. So there's a real tension between central administration and the faculty.
Tony, if I may, I want to respond to that gentleman's question about the role of administration. This is going to anger some people, I suppose, but that's all right. I'm old.
Before I let you respond, you can continue past 1 o'clock. I realize that some of you may have to leave, but we can continue past 1 o'clock if you wish.
The fact is that administrators are, at whatever level, are supposed to be, from the standpoint of faculty, first among equals. That is, administration is not supposed to be a career. It's supposed to be an opportunity that a person has, and then that person is supposed to go back to the classroom. It doesn't happen as often as it should, and it seems to me that the role of the administrator, insofar as that person has a role in the arrangement that we're talking about, students and faculty, is to do everything in his or her power to make certain that that compact can be maintained, that has the security, the support, and what have you. And that the administrator really has no role in interfering in that kind of relationship. That the administrator is there to make certain that the best conditions exist for that relationship. Beyond that, it seems to me the administrator does not have a role.
Okay. This gentleman's had his hand up for a while.
It seems to me a lot of the discussion stays in a very ideal realm. Professor Ross's comment really fixes that very well. You cannot teach a class in this university without having permission to teach it. You cannot teach a course in this university of your own design. You cannot teach it. You can. If I offered to the head of my department to teach a class in, I called it outsider. I teach history of art. Outsider art. You would deal with women in art, African Americans in art, Chicanos in art, Native Americans in art. The head of my department looked at me and he said, "Who's going to take that class?" Zero. In fact, if I wanted to teach the class, I could push it by him. That doesn't do you real well in your department. You try to push things over your department's head. Department chairs, heads of areas decide on what courses can be offered at all. Every course is evaluated continually, and even people with tenure don't get their raises. I've never seen anybody push freedom of academic, whatever, when they thought they were going to lose 50 cents, much less 2% of their salaries. Administrators, if we take this history class that's had so much controversy on campus, we're talking about African American history. We're not talking about the Industrial Revolution. We're not talking about what happened in Greece in the 5th century BC. What would you think of an administrator who would set up a course, or not an individual, a department or a university would set up a course in freedom of choice, discussion of a woman's right to control her own body, whether or not we have a right to abortion, that kind of thing. Set that course up, put it in a room for 400 people, and stick somebody in front of it. I mean, could you do a course like that? Could it be manageable? Or maybe Holocaust studies. If you take a really controversial subject, African American studies is, no matter, it's one of the great traumas of our society continually. To put a person in front of 90 people and then say, now teach this, not have to have any requirements that people get into the class, just anyone can take it at any position. I think you're asking somebody to do something that could be very interesting, and if they're a brilliant manipulator of other people, they can, if they're Bill Moyers, they can make an interesting discussion out of it. But I think when administrators put somebody in front of a course like that one, without special training and with so many people, they created a situation that no professor or very few could handle adequately. So I think the administration has a tremendous amount of power. They structure courses. Faculty only can teach what they want to about courses they're offered and told, you can teach this within these lines. There's not nearly as much freedom as we like to talk about, and certainly not in classes that depend directly on what we're doing. I would like, you each to respond to it a little bit. the compact, it seems to me, isn't free at all. Only the students who have the money can get into the school to begin with. And there's something called counterpart grading. My God, talk about we're all equal here. Some of us grade others.
Okay. Once again, I'm going to ask you to ask your question again. How do you want them to?
Well, I just simply to talk about where is the department and administration's role in fact, making courses available to students and giving professors enough opportunity to teach the course well. You know,
Okay.
size of the class requirement.
You want us to respond to that?
Yes.
Well, I can't speak for your department. I don't know what your department is like, but I know that in a number of departments, the curriculum is determined entirely by the faculty. It's not determined by the department chair. It's not determined by the dean. It's determined by the faculty. And the faculty of the department decide collectively, or in some cases small groups, depending on the discipline, what they think they ought to offer. And they solicit proposals from their colleagues, and they look at those proposals and they say, this fits right in with what we want to do, go ahead and do it. And I don't know whether maybe that's atypical, but I know that in some departments that's done.
That certainly is a common model across campus. It's more common for faculty to determine the curriculum than it is for a department chair to. Now, you're right, I think, in saying that there are some practical constraints that do work the other way. For example, you can't just simply offer a course and assume that it's going to be there for all time. We've set up a system in this university of having an experimental course period. The course has to be offered a couple of times before we consider putting it into the catalog permanently, for the practical reason that teaching courses costs money. And if we're going to put a course out there and nobody's going to come, is not serving the purpose for which it was designed, then what you've done is to tie up a faculty member and all the resources that it takes to get that course going, when that same faculty member could be teaching something that is going to fly. So we have those sorts of considerations that are built into the system. But I will acknowledge that there are departments where I suspect that heads or chairs have much more control over what is put into the curriculum than others. I think Dr. Ross is right that in most cases the faculty individually or collectively decide what's going to be taught in the department, and it isn't quite as black and white as you.
I didn't mean to separate the faculty from the administration in such a radical way, but I'm saying it's the department as a whole that makes a lot of these decisions, not even
sure.
the professors on what to do.
No question about that. Yeah.
And in fact, the department can automatically make any course fly. It's called a requirement. We have a lot of courses fly, and most students don't know. If we wanted the course, they require a certain number of faculty to teach it, and they require the students, and we all teach it. I mean, we have the kind of curriculum we do because the faculty in general has agreed that we shouldn't have courses in a lot of areas because they're not interested. And we're interested in a lot of things that don't have a lot of application in this world, and not interested in some important things that do.
Okay, right here.
The faculty do, in fact, at this university have responsibility for the curriculum. And I think that's true university-wide and virtually all departments. The curriculum committees in the departments make their recommendations to the Academic Affairs Council, and the council makes its recommendations to the faculty senate, and the senate as a whole approves or disapproves changes in the curriculum. So what there is at this university is not just the responsibility of one person or one faculty or one department, but the faculty of the university as a whole.
There have been a few exceptions to that. There are a few occasions which regions have sent down orders for the change in the faculty and bypassed the faculty senate.
However, I've been here a long time, some days I think too long, but I never remember an instance in which a department was told by a dean or by a vice president or what have you, that you will not teach this course, or you may not teach courses in this area. The only time that the dean ever gets involved is when there's a resource question. And if you've got two people enrolled in the course, you have to make a decision about whether that's the way you want to spend your resources. But never in my experience here has the administration at any level that I'm aware of said to a faculty member, you may not teach this course.
Well, I can think of a generic case that we do have an agreement across the Regent's institutions about what subject areas we will teach and which ones we will not. Partly as a part of a resource question, but partly just by common agreement among us. For example, we do not teach or offer degrees in human medicine or law at Iowa State. That's something that Iowa City does, and if someone here tried to teach courses in law other than the sorts of stuff that Dr. Shakeshaft would teach when he was teaching a pre-law course, that would not be allowed simply because we've agreed to split that responsibility across the Regent's institutions. But within our mandate as a university, I think you're right.
I want to follow Gary's
Okay.
comments. I was thinking about the history of the way courses get in place at the university. And what strikes me, I've been here for 26 years, is the number of courses that have been established in response to student concerns. And my two examples are women's studies and African American studies. When I started here, there was not an African American minors program. There are now 13 courses offered. Well, over a period of 26 years, maybe that's slow, maybe it's fast, but it's a reality that there's going to change. There wasn't a women's studies program when I started here. I personally want to start a peace studies program at Iowa State University. It's on the back burner. But the point is that there are processes, and I think the problem is with the students is they look at the immediate context and don't look at the historical process that has been occurring at the university. And the university is really a much more responsive place than the students give credit for being. And it may not be fast enough responsive, and there may be a certain middle ground there, sort of Rotarian, that is not, to your taste, but change does occur. And it is a process that goes on. So I, in some ways, like to interject that in the whole discussion, is the universities are perhaps more responsive than the public or the student realize, because university people are members of society. They look at what's happening in society. African American faculty members. There's been a significant increase. Maybe not enough, but there's been an increase. And that needs to be said too. I won't say.
Does anybody on the panel want to respond to that or make a comment on that before I go to another question?
I've been musing every once in a while. This is my own personal midlife thing. I remember the 60s because I was a student in the 60s, as many of the faculty were students in the 60s, and we remember how we wanted to change the universities and how we would teach alternative courses or urge the faculty to teach alternative courses if we could get faculty who were open-minded enough to do it. And I can say, I don't know where the point of this is, except that I find it kind of amusing to find myself as a faculty member in his late 40s, looking around and finding students discovering what I discovered 25 years ago, and having the same sort of experiences doing it.
I do want to say one thing, though, and it's been alluded to. I think Gary did a moment ago, and maybe Frank did too. One of the things that's happened to institutions like this in recent years is that economic pressures have determined that they deliver instruction in ways that seem to be efficient. We're talking about dollars and cents. And one of those ways is the notion of the big class, larger class sizes. Our class size in literature now are 10 students greater than they were 10 years ago. That's not because we wanted to do that. That's because we were told, you do it this way because here are the resources you have. Now, how much discussion can we promote? Well, we promote as much as we can under the circumstances, but sometimes the subject matters that we are professing are subject matters that would work much better if we had 10 students or even 5 students to talk about, to give that student a chance to do some of the things we've been saying students need to do and faculty need to encourage them to do. And then, but we've unfortunately yielded all too often to that pressure and have decided that it really doesn't make any difference. Any course, except notice for graduate courses, can be taught in very large lectures if necessary. So the subject matter of a course may not, unfortunately, determine or dictate the class size. Instead, economics may dictate the class size. And that can have some very, very negative effects upon this contract that we've talked about.
But even sometimes when, and certainly want to defend students at every step of the way, there are times when students have the opportunity to respond and to say things, and you make assignments, you raise questions, you say, look at this, look at that, and they come to class the next time the same way, without having looked at anything. I assigned a text recently that foregrounded upper class African American family in Philadelphia. Some of my students were just simply flowed by that they had a vision of African American people all living in the city, all struggling, all having difficulty ever living, finding anything, and they just didn't like the text at all. I mean, they were hostile, not resistant readers, they were hostile readers to the text because it went against the grain. You know what I'm saying? Now, certainly the classroom has to be open. I insist on that. But a lot of times students do not want that classroom. They come from a certain notion of reality, and they do not want you to explode that notion at all. Not putting students down. But students remind me very much sometimes of the student in the French system. You come, you take the notes of the lecture, give it back, and hope you have enough grades to pass at the end. And don't ever engage. Ever.
Okay.
Okay, two things. What you said in terms of, say, economics, say, dictating the size of class, not knowing that much about economics, from what I know, I can mainly say that I would have to agree, because a lot of classes, they do seem, in terms of bringing in more money, you have a bigger class size, and that usually isn't the best choice. And granted, that's what's happened. But mostly, and I will say, I am speaking from experience of the African American History course 353, specifically. But when you do come across situations like that, it would be my guess that you would want to put the teacher in there that would be the best one to deal with that type of situation. Not only the best one that knows the information that's covered on the topic, but also to deal with the situation. And if you have a professor that can't deal with the situation, whether they know the subject matter or not, then obviously they aren't. Obviously, one of the two has to be changed. And if the class size can't be changed, then the teacher should be changed. Another thing in terms of change in the university, and there has been change. Granted, I'm not a history student, and history isn't my major, but from looking back in history and from the things I have seen in history, the one thing that has been noted that if change is wanted, there's usually two parties. There's the party that doesn't want the change or only wants a little bit of change. And then there's the party that wants a whole bunch of change, which is, I believe, usually the liberals and the conservatives. And in order to get change, you have to have both. And I believe it's the students' part to be on the more liberal side. Because, well, at least from my point of view, I think the students should keep asking for more and more, because that's the only way to get more. Because if you don't ask for any more, just say, okay, yeah, we have some more African American professors. We have 5 African American professors. I'm not saying that's how many we have. It's just we have 5, so nobody else has said anything else about wanting more. So I guess we satisfied everybody. We don't need more, even though there may still be a need for more. If it's not asked for, it's not going to be thought of to terms of students realizing that there's a procedure for going through asking requests for the university. Students, I'm speaking from my point of view, I don't think, not many students know that procedure. So they ask the way they can. And granted, once they are informed, students will probably go through the procedures. But I don't see why they should be faulted for asking the only way that they know at the time. And that also should not be discounted because it's not the procedure. Whether it's procedure or not, obviously there's a problem. And should not be left up to, well, we can't do anything until the procedure is followed. So that's more a statement than a question. I just wanted to say that.
Okay, if there are no other questions, in lieu of the time, it's about 20 after 1. I'd like to thank our panelists for coming and thank all of you for coming.
Thank you. Thanks,
Nice job.
Thank you.
All good together.
Ed.